others in Brazil for some cases.
Bolsonaro? Bolsonaro?
Yeah, but what's the populism idea? Yes.
Separating yourself from the elite and sort of alienating yourself from the de facto class.
Good. In order to have who with you? Who are you joining if you're leaving the elite?
The people, the full, the masses.
Yes. So it's a visible, explicit saying, I'm for you, you the people. Okay, lots of people have said that, but then to try to show that, to do it in various ways, is what makes populism distinctive. And populism grows out of egalitarianism, that everybody is equal or should be moved in a more equal direction, whether it's men and women, young and old, black and white, animals, nature, and people, with sustainability as a sub-theme. Okay, so let's look at these two, populism and issue specificity linked with egalitarianism, and look at where they have come from in a powerful way so that they have become so powerful, not just with Trump. That's the point. He didn't invent these. And there are many other people from China to Eastern Europe to Russia that are using the same things. So where and why? Let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, the simple answer is read Daniel Ellazar. We're going to do that a little bit today. We're going to do it more later in the course when we have a little more time. But I want to just, for today, all I want to do is use a small part of Ellazar, which is really his three types of subcultures in America, three political American subcultures. And these we can put on a map. This is not a beautiful Rand McNally map of the Great Lakes. This is New England. Okay. We've got New England moralistic. We've got Middle Atlantic individualistic. And we've got Southern hierarchy, Hierarchy, failed spelling in the fourth grade, and I never improved since. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about these. The quick point, which we'll go into later, is that these came from different parts of Europe. These are European subcultures. The hierarchy part comes from slavery, from the feudal era of people are legally this, legally that. You committed a crime. You stole a fork from you were working as a servant. You stole a fork. You become an indentured servant for life. And in that way, we have slavery continuing today, with people branded, labeled as slaves and others as masters. Okay, even if the law no longer says that, the ideology, the feelings, the culture, the background is still there of slavery. Fighting against slavery, we'll come back and forth among these, is moralism, most directly in the late 18th century in Boston and London, especially women who didn't have the vote, had a lot of meetings, speeches, speakers, examples, songs, novels, poems, attacking slavery, attacking racism, and saying we need to give this up. This was happening in, before 1800. in powerful ways in Boston. And when Tocqueville came here in 1820s, 1830s, he wrote about the most distinctive activist visible part of democracy in America was civic activities through churches having a moralistic style that comes from the minister or the church or reading the Bible and applying that to other things, good and bad. The specific residues were things like the New England town meeting, where it was felt obligatory that it was a moral duty that everybody should come, sit, and participate. And ideally, you would make decisions unanimously. You wouldn't just say, let's take 49, 51 votes and go to 51 and crush the 49. You say, let's change the issue through discussion so we can have a unanimous policy that we all agree on. That is the ideal of New England moralism. Consensus, unanimity, building people into it, treating everyone equally, listening thoughtfully, and trying to change the way that decisions are made. It takes longer. The classic example were Puritans and others who, the Quakers, who would in their meetings would sit silent until they had no minister, no speaker, wait until one person felt moved to say a word or two. You say, I'm cold, or, it's the rain. Why has it been so rainy for 3 days? And you could start with something trivial, and then it would circulate. Okay, this is still the ideal of the faculty at the University of Chicago. We had a faculty meeting today at noon, which is why I didn't talk to one of you on the phone at 12:30. I was in faculty meeting. Okay. People who held this view in Boston and Salem, Massachusetts, the more pure version, it was the bigger port before Boston. When they drained the Boston Harbor, Salem died. Salem, with its witches, with its stronger moralism, is still most studied by historians in terms of how do these things get defined. Went across all of New England, but then went out like this to Portland, Oregon, to Eugene, to Seattle, through Western Michigan, where you've got a lot of Dutch moralism, through Minnesota, where you have great NPR discussions of comedy and the like, building on this moralistic tradition. By contrast, we have most of these came most specifically from England, but they in turn were linked with other styles that in this case were more parts of German, were parts of in this specific case, the contract tradition of Scotland. So Adam Smith, others thought more individualistically in a tradition also called utilitarianism. We'll cover this a little more in the future, but you can read about this, have these words in mind. The utilitarian tradition, which is core still today in economics and psychology as disciplines, led people like Trump to write a book. He mostly did little tweets, which the world knows him for, but he wrote some books. And one was called, what's his most famous book that's important for this idea of the contract and things he would talk about, things he would break relationships with Iran about. Yes.
The Art of the Deal.
Exactly. There we go. The art of the deal. He talked about that was a bad deal we did with Iran. Obama did with Iran. We want to get out of this. We're not going to follow it. We're going to do something else. Okay, the deal treats, like a Twitter tweet, treats each line separate, as a separate entity. You don't need to put all the deals together in a program like the left and right, or a NATO, or a NAFTA coalition of countries. You try to treat each deal separately. Okay. Is this realistic? When economic theory talks about contracts and atomistic, or say we have an individual consumer and she wants some bright red shoes. She doesn't care if what store they come from, she wants the best red shoes she can find. That's an atomistic conception, which ignores friends she's shopping with, where the store is, how far it is from her home. Maybe the price. The price comes in with the redness of the shoes and the beauty of the construction and so forth. But the point is, it ignores the bigger context. It ignores the dress. It ignores the other things. The strong individualism is in a sense the opposite of the moralism of New England. The moralistic New England view is that your whole self, your whole life, that God and Jesus can't be tricked. Your whole life is evaluated by whether you and by them and whether you go to heaven or hell, whether you spend and how much time you spend in purgatory. And that kind of simple tracking image is used theologically. But the strong version here is that, each decision is separate. Heaven and hell are a long way off. I don't know if or how I'll ever get there, and so forth. And one thing I do now, nobody's going to know. Okay, so the individualism of Trump here similarly went west to San Francisco through parts of Chicago. Much of Chicago is, in that sense, is individualistic, but you also have within Chicago the Reformed so-called tradition of the city council, which comes right from the New England moralism. So we have all three political cultures within the city of Chicago city council. The aldermen differ in these three styles. So that's why these are powerful for city politics and decision making. These are the rules of the game, the criteria they use for evaluation of making these things. The Southern, of course, went out to Southern California, through Texas to Oklahoma, with the Okies, with the Texas Rangers, with cowboys. Cowboys were also individualistic. So the classic Hollywood movie of the cowboy and the horse of these is a strong version of individualism. The individual cowboy, the Marlboro smoker, Ronald Reagan, these stuff, are drag racing of the individual car, which we get today, the motorcycles in Chicago on Saturday and Friday night and more. These are the individualistic strains, which we still have STR traditions, themes that we have in our lives today, as well as people fighting against them, saying this is immoral, this is irresponsible, and battles thus among these three political cultures persist. And I'm using, because this in this one paper for today, we're just sticking with the U.S. As we proceed, we're going to use this for China, for Mexico, for the Middle East, and so forth. And one big point for India, because India, if you think this is an extreme, India has much more moralism than New England. The Indian prophets, the gurus in the jungles of India, built this up into a national, for some persons, a national perspective that is more powerful than anywhere in the West. Okay, so having broader international comparisons will bring in as we proceed. But for now, this is the core idea these are the core ideas of Belisarian I'm going to get out here. Okay, let me stop there for a second with questions, comments on that thus far. Yes.
What sort
Yeah,
of?
why don't you introduce yourself briefly with your name?
Yes, I'm Fernando.
Fernando, okay.
What
Yeah,
sort?
where'd you go to college, Fernando?
College?
In what city? Yeah. College?
Here.
Yeah, so get me, sorry, I'm sorry. High school, where'd you go to high school?
High school, I went to the Hotchkiss School in Connecticut.
Hotchkiss, okay, there we go. Not quite Mexico. All right. Now, so you have seen, with Hotchkiss School, you've seen New England moralism in action for sure. So that's perfect. And so with Mexican background, Hotchkiss, USC, you're perfectly qualified to talk about all this stuff. And You know it intuitively, so do ask.
What sort of, I understand on a tactile level, you know, differentiating these moral guides that differentiate these subcultures is interesting and useful. But on a policy level, what can we glean from knowing these differentiations?
Well, lots and lots and lots. If you're Biden and you've just been elected, who do you appoint? What are the criteria by which you choose your cabinet? What are the voting blocks that elected you? How much will you listen to the 49% of the 51% who did not vote for you? The Middle Atlantic says you don't listen to those people. These people say you should, the Quaker tradition is you should listen to everyone. And those are in conflict. If you're going to a meeting with Macron or Putin, what should you talk about? Okay. Should you talk about hard, difficult, conflictual politics? Should you talk about things you share? Should you talk about ideals that you have in common? Or should you talk about the 4 things you did wrong last week? Those are policy decisions. And mayors, aldermen, students like you face the same kinds of decisions every day. So all these are hugely policy oriented. What do you write in an exam? I had the finance director of Chicago come to class. A lot of Harris School students and undergraduate public policy majors. You know, one first question was, what should I study at the USC so that I can really be policy oriented and get a job to work in finance in the city of Chicago? What do you think his answer was? Learn to write a clear half-page memo. He didn't say calculus. He didn't say, you know, efficient markets. He said, learn to write a clear memo. And that's policy oriented because mayors especially, or shorter still, talk shows or shorter still, Twitter tweets, are all that many decisions are based on. I won't say all, I mean, I'm exaggerating when I say all, but those are the core, which, so these are, all of these are correct answers in that sense. Okay. I say that from having, for instance, deliberately worked with mayors inside the US of all of these political cultures and many different regions to try to see how they think and work and act. And because I grew up in New England, in the Midwest, in California, in the South, and unlike most people, I was shocked and horrified as I saw and felt these differences at age 10, age 12, age 15, 22, and so yeah, and I'm sure you've got bits of you as well, with feet in Mexico, heart in wherever. Okay. So any more on Elazar? Anyone? Yes.
I'm actually with CX.
Okay.
Question, so are there any institutions that you readily sort of associate with any one of the 3 political subcultures? I know, for example, for the moralistic subculture, you mentioned the idea of a city council.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a stitch of that political tradition. Are there any other institutions that we can like identify as like, oh, this is something from like an individual, you know what I mean?
Good question. Sure. City manager government. City manager is a required form of government in some of the western states and small towns. California has second non-partisan elections. You may not have the name of a party affiliated with a candidate versus strong party versus partisan versus stronger parties or weaker parties. These are laws in places like California where the state was created to have more non-partisan elections, and they had strong city managers through much of the 20th century. at large elections, traditionally held in that way, and for most of the city council of LA, you elect people so they represent not just Santa Monica, but the whole county, or big voting wards rather than small voting wards. Chicago does the opposite. We have 50 wards, 50 aldermen, and these are deliberately created to permit the Croats and the Serbs and the Slovenes and the Poles to have different wards from each other, so they can each be represented. They each have a church in a different neighborhoods. That's why we have 700 Catholic churches and parishes. They have private schools affiliated with those parishes. These are explicitly separated by traditionally ethnic group in that sense. So, and quick answer, lots of institutions, of which these are some of the most visible local government institutional regulations that shift powers. The legal rights of the mayor and the council, so-called strong mayor versus weak mayor form of government. We have officially a weak mayor form of government in Chicago. We officially have, I'm just pointing out, ironically, nonpartisan elections for lots of positions. Lots of people are not listed by party. Nevertheless, this is the strongest Democratic, of any party in the whole U.S. This Democratic Party. So the law does not determine what people do. Sometimes it does, but in these examples of Chicago, right now, what do the police do? This is a debate going on yesterday, this weekend, today, because of the shooting in the Austin neighborhood. The mayor is arguing with the attorney, the county attorney, et cetera, over who's responsible. The mayor says the police can't do. The police say we can't go after anybody because we take them in, we arrest them, and the judges and the prosecution just let them go free. So why should we do anything? That's where we are right now in Chicago. So there's a battle over how do the laws get implemented, and which law, if there's contradiction, which one takes precedence when you have two elected officials fighting against each other over each of their interpretation of what's the law. Yeah.
Professor Sarah Barakat, who's watching the Zoom, asks, would you say nonpartisan elections are aligned with the moralistic point of view?
Yes. Yes, generally, in the sense that parties generally are meant to win power and to define a holistic program. And those are, that could be moralistic. I wouldn't say it's a total intellectual or theological contradiction or cultural contradiction, but they're elements. If we get to separate elements like holism, which is the opposite of issue specificity here, that aspect. The positive, the positive linkage. The positive linkage is that the holism says, think of the whole city of the whole county of LA. Don't just think of your Santa Monica, if you're from Santa Monica. Yes.
Yeah.
Your name, please, is
Sorry,
what's your name?
my name is Anna.
Anna.
So I think specifically.
Where'd you go to high school?
In Tennessee.
Tennessee. Which town?
Nashville.
Nashville.
Well, kind of Nashville, but I was in Nashville.
Nearby. Okay, terrific.
So speaking from the context of what's denoted here to be a traditionalistic.
Okay, West and East Tennessee are the South and the North. Okay, so you're from the South.
Yes.
Okay.
So speaking from my, I guess, knowledge of Southern politics to a certain extent, would you agree? I can certainly see comparatively the traditionalistic framework at play. But would you agree that, increasingly now urban centers are receptors for change, for more moralistic or individualistic people to come in, particularly when I'm thinking of like local elections, like mayoral elections, they at least run the platform of having a moralistic standpoint, in are blue, which, seems to associate itself more with a moralistic standpoint. And then I also, look at, not on a local level, but for example, like, for an individualistic, example, I would think of like Governor DeSantis in Florida, seems to be, especially with the neoliberal, idea tends to align itself with individualistic framework. And so I guess my question is, would you agree that, urban centers increasingly now, would be receptors and would be like instigators of change, from the urban center outward of accepting more, moralistic or individualistic, views in the South specifically?
Yeah, broadly, yes. That is, and if we ask why, we go into this a little more in the new political culture, which we should turn to in a second. That is, it asks why change? What changes? That is, many people take political cultures as fixed. And if by talking historically, we're implicitly doing that. We're saying, what are the roots of this? But also, if we look, we can see where is there change over time, and focusing, say, on the cities versus the more traditional rural areas in China or the South is clearly a way to do that. On the other hand, if we contrast, say, New Orleans with Atlanta, we get two very different views of that is the the Museum of the City of New Orleans plays up explicitly to the visitor the histories of racial conflict, of violence, of the Ku Klux Klan, of Northern armies, and that's that sort of thing. Atlanta, when you walk in from an airport and you're into the airport and you're arriving, you hear what an outsider would call a general American voice, no Southern accent. And you have no sense that you're in the South. So there are elements of subcultures which vary substantially by, or sort of, let's say, stronger if we go to Charlotte, South Carolina, more traditional Southern town versus in the fact that the state of Tennessee split in the Civil War and they couldn't decide whether to go with the North or the South, indicates the degree to which these were divisions that go back. But if we then say why, and that's what's nice about your comments, you're saying if you look at linkages with neoliberalism or the governor of Florida, et cetera, that's what we want to do, and maybe I should turn to that now. But let me pause for one more minute. You have any sort of example just for the others? And I asked before deliberately, and I'm glad we got some from the South speaking out. Can you want to give us an example of something about the South that still strikes you as distinctly Southern or makes you feel non-Southern in Hyde Park, or that is, give them a flavor of what does the South mean in a way that you can feel as in touch almost, that's different.
Gosh.
Or an experience in your own life.
Well, this isn't, is it okay if it's not like a political example?
Sure. Anything, non-political. Fine.
Actually, the high school I went to, is an all-girls private school that is traditionally finishing school. And the neighborhood that it serves predominantly, is on plantation land, and they have a museum for the family, the mansion, owns that plantation. And that's still, goes by the same name. If they have their own mayor, if they have, very traditional values, that they make very clear, and in their welcome center. And so it's a preservation of the traditionalistic values in the land, that's cultivated around those values.
That's perfect. That's just perfect. Any way that continues in the way that the students were in class, or the teachers ever said do this or don't do that, or whatever?
we were taught to, we actually had classes on how to, so like I said, it was an all-girls school. We were taught how to walk like a lady, cross your legs like a lady, very strict dress code. They're now starting to have a debate on transgender students, and I think they're disallowing, I think, transgender students, more like cultural, social traditionalism as well, but I think that gives a sense of like a political traditionalism.
That's perfect. Okay, that's great. Well, let's try to use this or maybe ask you for more, because I mean, you not only have you seen it, you're very articulate in discussing it, so we need you. Because most people here know about these, but they don't know about the South.
Yeah.
So that's, and the media, how often have you ever seen anything about finishing school on CBS or NBC?
When my school we have this big tradition that, in more recent years, that this tradition that celebrates like slaveholders. And so we actually decided to, or the board actually, so the board is very conservative, but after a lot of pushback, they decided to stop that tradition. And then we were on Fox News saying that we were instigating a race war and that they were saying that, we're supposed to be this good conservative school, that had gotten rid of the tradition. So,
Okay,
but to answer your question, no, I haven't seen anything.
no, but that's all perfect. Okay, these are most of, I mean, Oxford, you'd never hear anything like this. Right, I mean, you're worlds apart, but they're both elite, high quality private schools, which in that sense, precisely because they're not aiming at a majority of Americans, they're aiming to very specific subcultures, can be more culturally powerful and revelatory of how do these distinctive subcultures hold together. Okay, that's great. All right, let's push on with the second main reading.
Professor.
Yeah.
I have one more question from the chat. Sarah again. She wants to ask, since religion plays a role in forming political culture, would you say that the Middle East has major influences from Islam that goes into their political culture? And to what extent do people still agree with that political culture given the major revolutions that have happened?
I mean, nice, simple question. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, probably the Middle East is the most powerful single example globally right now, maybe along with Buddhism and Hinduism in India and Pakistan. But the Pakistan, but it's the same thing. I'll just ask a question. Which country in the world has the most Muslims?
Indonesia.
Indonesia. Which is second most important? Would you, okay. Would you, many people have said Pakistan because, India broke up and there's Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are Muslim, and there's India, which is left. But this is the answer. He's from India. India has more Muslims than any country in the world except Indonesia. India has more Muslims than Bangladesh or Pakistan. Okay, so this is domestic Indian politics, as well as international politics. And then when you get to within Turkey, within Egypt, within Pakistan, within Afghanistan, battles over women's roles, who gets to go to school or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, these are very, very powerful. And Muslim religion is probably the most visibly powerful. So I'm agreeing, yes, very major, but I'm pointing out the battles among and within Muslim groups, different mosques, different leaders, different political statements, different novels are fighting with each other. And the more extreme leave the Middle East, they go London or Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich, but they're these activists, these people may be emigres, and then we have a change in Afghanistan, then they come back from abroad, and bang, they've got a whole set of followers, a whole program, etc. So yes, very powerful, important, and the roots in that sense are moralistic and religious, which is what they share with this part. So that, in a sense, I left that out. As I said, I deal with the narrow part of LSR, which is just America. But these roots, it's good to have raised as you did. So thanks. Okay. The new political culture of the book and the idea came from a project that grew out of the International Sociological Association. I was the founder and president for several decades, and we had meetings of people from countries all over the world, often studying these very kinds of issues. We had people, say, from Poland, and Poland was part of the Soviet bloc. We had people from Yugoslavia, which was in between. We had people from the left in France and Italy, and people from the right in Finland and the American South. Okay. People disagree over all kinds of things. And we would often learn from each other because we were committed to learning, and we saw these things were important. We saw they were fighting with people around the world were fighting, and so we discussed, and these ideas, I would say, my learning ended up writing the book, but the book has a lot of co-authors. I mean, I wrote the major sections at the beginning, but they're co-authors of different chapters later on, and they reflect some of this discussion. And what I say in the earlier chapters is distilled from these changes. The simple reaction is against the simple left-right. No longer is there a simple left-right. Instead we can call it, and so in that sense, the NPC narrowly defined, very simply, the most narrow, simple definition is that the NPC is people who are, if this is fiscal conservatism and social conservatism, you can be high or low, high or low. So if you're socially conservative and you're fiscally conservative, this is the traditional right. This is Ronald Reagan. Down here, we've got Marx, Lenin, traditional left. Over here, we've got the socially liberal, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. This, to simplify, I'll say this is Bill Clinton. And down here we have Richard Hatcher and Gary. Okay. Ethnic politics. Ethnic politics, high spending. Okay. These four types, the traditional left, traditional right, traditional ethnic politics have been around and documented for a long time. This is new. And so what we're trying to elaborate in the book, and what I'll talk about a little bit now, is what was new, what changed, what brought about the salience of this new type, and how can we generalize from it to places like India or China? Okay, globalization. The new critical role of amenities and consumption, which we'll talk about in the next section of the course. And these in turn within cities tend to be more compelling because people are walking side by side and they're differing in their outlooks and in the amenities which they like, such as a traditional Irish bar versus organic vegan plates. I'll just list very quickly that this spread through the world with the end of the Cold War in 1989, down the fall of the Berlin Wall, global peace thereafter, the decline of major tariffs and trade barriers, and the rise of new regional trading blocs, as well as global trade. Not as far as Saskia Sassen would have liked or wrote about it, but still it's a major change from the Cold War. The rapid increase of connectedness via new modes of communications, fax, internet, fiber optic, digitalization, social media. Drastic expansion of education for citizens in many countries of the world, thus giving more citizens a sense of self-worth and ability to read and form opinions on major public issues. Egalitarianism. Decline of agricultural and industrial work, huge decline, drop of industrial jobs by about half from World War II, and the rise of more professional, service-oriented, increasingly technically based jobs where emphasis on computers and machines and innovation, knowledge, creativity replace the traditional manual tasks. Okay, these are the sources in a sense, which are big and broad. They're not evenly spread. Clearly, there's lots of traditional rural China. There's the traditional Americans in Illinois, in some neighborhoods of Chicago. But these differences we can look at and analyze where and why they emerge or change. What's globalization? We'll talk about this more in the winter course I give called Global Local Politics, but just in 3 words. The city is a global market participant is the fiscal economic Wall Street meaning, capital and labor. Widely used by Sasson and others. Talk about Wall Street. The second is globalization based on the city as an entertainment machine, to take a second look. Entertainment here is consumption, Hollywood. Those aspects of the city which define its unique attractions. Tourism is the 3rd largest or 1st largest industry, depending on how you're counting. Attracting visitors has become big business for Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, and other places. Stadiums, parks, museums, convention centers, similar facilities helping to win visitors near and far. The third is the city is global democracy. Here, the democratizing impacts of global leaders and non-governmental organizations press cities that lag on human rights, expanding citizens' human rights, continue to grow in their extreme and their extent and seriousness of application to women, children, Indian untouchables, the homeless, illegal immigrants, as well as physical entities that assume human rights, like Civil War soldiers who are being torn down, especially the higher levels, being torn down, painted, repainted, removed, first by crowds, and second by governors, mayors, starting in the South, but then spreading to Christopher Columbus, that neo-fascist. Globalization in all 3 areas illustrate more information about options, more potential and actual context, more persons are incorporated or empowered, thus illustrating what Adam Smith talked about it as the extent of the market, which is not just money, it's also a sense of entertainment, it's a sense of political engagement. More competition in previous arenas that were formerly based on decisions, more from hierarchy or tradition than by market and competition. Okay, so these are the background of this new political culture, which is big and broad and global. If we also have a decline of clientelism in class politics, so the clientelism and class in decline with the rise of this NPC. We've got the, I'll give you more path diagrams of this in the future. This is a little one here for now. The crude, simple way of summarizing is to say agriculture leads to clientelism. Master-slave, feudal relations, you fought the war. The black slaves of Confederate soldiers went to war, they had Confederate uniforms as well, even though they were black. They were fighting against those damn Yankees. And they were helping the master, helping the others as if they were still on the plantation, etc. So agriculture, the feudal hierarchy of clientelism, has gone down as agriculture has gone down from, something like a great majority of the American economy in 1900, just 1900, well over a century ago, to, what 5, 3, 7, 8%, depending on where you look. Second, industry. Industry is this normal foundation of class politics. If we look at a simple economic driver, this is what Marx talked about, what you've heard again and again. Management versus the people, management versus the workers, management versus the proletariat, or capitalist versus the non-capital owners, etc. The news is that as industry has gone down, so has class politics. Unions get weaker. Potential union members like school teachers, people in an industrial factory don't want to pay union dues, and so they try to get the government to force we talked about this last week briefly, to take the money out from people's workers' paychecks before it goes to the worker, give it to the union directly. Okay, that's a kind of policy battle which illustrates this. But as unions have declined in the private sector, they've relatively risen in the public sector for police, fire. So you can have the head of the Chicago police, basically it's a union, in Chicago. They wrote to Donald Trump and said, this city's out of control. Please send in the National Guard, or, please come and help. The mayor said, what the hell is this? Donald Trump, we don't want you here. You have that kind of thing going on in ways that private sector wouldn't touch anything like that. Okay, so the police example, on the other hand, in Minneapolis, where we had a guy went for a trial, his legal fees were paid by his union, he's appealing it, the union says no money, so he's going to defend himself. Because the unions are still serious players, even in the politics of race going on right now. NBC has 7 dimensions. The classic left-right dimension is transformed. Social, fiscal, economic issues are explicitly distinguished. Social and economic are different. That's what I've done right here, to show how you can be conservative on one and liberal on the other. It's not, that is, the traditional left and right wouldn't show that. Social issues have risen in salience relative to fiscal and economic issues. The last 5-year plan approved in February in China did not state an economic goal. They did not say we want to grow the economy by 12% or 8%. They didn't have any number at all. First time ever since Mao, whatever. Instead, they talk about pollution, the environment, making cities more livable, improving people's domestic choices, housing, etc. Domestic politics. You read about this in the New York Times or whatever? No. You read about Taiwan and military international conflicts. You don't get the story, but we'll dig out a little bit. And I'm bringing that in simply because you can find the same thing in France, England, US, South Africa, but to find it in China, which is supposedly an underdeveloped country, or India, as we talked about last time, with these computer cities, mainly one big computer city, is a small revolution. Market individualism and social individualism grow in that sense. And in that, the question was, are these changing? And a couple of you asked that in different ways. And if you look at some measures of surveys and actions, there's a continuing rise of moralism and individualism, the continual decline of traditionalism among American voters, citizens, and similarly, when we have world value survey items internationally. Fifth, questioning the welfare state. The NPC folks like Bill Clinton do not want to give up. They're not against government. They love government. They want to help people do the good things better. Swimming pools, equal rights, better schools, better welfare services. But they don't want to increase taxes. That's the revolution. Can you do both of those things at once? And what's the logical answer to how you can combine fiscal conservatism with social liberalism? Yes.
2 questions. First, I would argue the answer to that, I believe, is privatization of services. And the second question is, can you repeat the tenants?
Can you repeat what?
Can you repeat the fourth tenant?
Yeah, the fourth tenet is the rise of market individualism and social individualism. Okay, that's the simple one. Your answer is a good one in terms of potentially contracting out and so forth, but that's a means. Those are potential mechanisms for improving productivity. If we've got so much money from taxes coming in, how can we, as a mayor, how can I use it better to build more basketball courts, but not increase taxes? Maybe you can find someone who will be a contractor, so you put out bids and say, how much will it cost to change this plot of green grass to a basketball court? And you get 3 people who bid, and you take the lowest bidder. Maybe that's the way to do it. Mike Quigley, who's now the replacement in the US Congress of Obama, when Obama became mayor, Mike Quigley was elected. He's a former student, worked as a county council member before he was in the US Congress. And when he was still a student here, he worked as an assistant for one of the aldermen. And the alderman said, what are the major problems people have in this neighborhood? And one of the answers was traffic. We're going to have lots of little streets and people are double parking, or there are people parking illegally. They leave their cars. What can we do? So the answer was tow the cars. The city towers towed 2 cars a day, he found. The private companies towed from 5 to 12 a day for the same cost. So he said, he helped to draft a bill and says, why don't we contract out towing the car? He got his nose broken. He was just an assistant student working in City Hall. Somebody broke his nose. We don't know who it was. Okay, so violence doesn't happen just in Mexico. All right. But he's a hockey player. And he's used to that stuff, and he's broken his nose more than one, and he still plays hockey. Okay, Mike Quigley. And I'll just mention him. Okay, let me stop. Get through the more general points. Issue politics and broader. So 4, 5 was the welfare state. 6. The rise of issue politics, which we started with Donald Trump and tweets, and combined with broader citizen participation. This is the core of the populism that we have today, spreading all around. Many of these other things are linked with it, but not always. So Trump clearly is not taking the liberal side of many of the social issues. In that sense, Trump was closer to Reagan. In some ways, he was more conservative than Reagan, or more explicitly racist, if you will, or ethnic, this or that. That is, Trump was all over the place. But my point is, in terms of identifying these components, we can see these became identified as part of earlier issues with a person like Bill Clinton. So Clinton was doing populism, and in the book we call this, in the earlier book, which we read already, first week, is called City Money. We didn't talk about about the NPC, we talked about the new fiscal populists. Same basic idea, but it was elaborated further years. I did this in part with Ron Engelhardt and chose to remove the term. 7th point, these NPC views are more pervasive among younger, more educated and affluent individuals, cities, and societies. Okay. So how's our time going?
It's 5:37.
5:37. Okay. Let me just mention one or two things, and then we can discuss and go back and forth. I'll bring more of this. Migration was a fourth thing that we touched on briefly in the City Money book. And I mentioned in the first week, but it's a chapter there, and it becomes more visible if we look at cities, because people migrate from rural areas to cities because they leave one city and go to another. People left have been most visibly recently with the California salient politically. We've had people like Tesla and others from Silicon Valley move their headquarters to Texas. So Texas, California, partially conservative, liberal in some sense, maybe a tax sense, maybe another sense. How much is that driving jobs, or conversely, what drives jobs? And as if we ask, how much is it? What's the driver? Is the driver the job, and the owner, like Tesla or Oracle, the computer company that moved to Texas, or is it Hewlett Packard's example? When there was a woman president of Hewlett Packard, she said, we expand in those cities where there are people who we feel would be good Hewlett Packard staff members, or where there are already some and they like being in Portland, Oregon, so we expand in Portland, Oregon. The opposite of poor blacks in the South go to Detroit. The automobile company, or not the automobile, the HP computer company, goes to Portland because the employees that they want are already there. That reverses the causal arrow. So how much do jobs go to people, or how much do people go to jobs? And then which amenities might attract people as well as jobs? Amenities like theater, restaurants, bicycle paths, concerts. Boeing's headquarters was moved from Seattle to Chicago about 10 years ago. Boeing has had some problems with its airplanes. Have the Boeing top staff been too busy with the Chicago Symphony? All right, maybe it's better to be in a slightly more boring city like Detroit. Okay, I'll leave that as a question. We'll come back to this as we proceed, but NPC mayors emerge across the US and then around the world, and individual mayors are implementing these NPC policies even before, or less, I shouldn't say before, along with identifying changes in the citizens that they want to work with. Michael White in Cleveland, Richard Riordan in Los Angeles, Rodolphe Giuliani in New York, Edward Rindell in Philadelphia, Stephen Goldsmith in Indianapolis, Richard M. Daley in Chicago are all listed as pursuing these kinds of policies. They're closer to Bill Clinton than they are to the others. Most of these mayors were highly visible in terms of national media coverage, and thus other mayors talked with them and listened to them and began to change in directions that they worked on. Rowan Miranda did the first PhD at the Harris School. He was a student of mine and he worked on, I mean, his topic was contracting out. And the main point was, the issue is not whether it's public or private, it's competitiveness. If you have a private monopoly and you don't have competitive pricing, you can get high prices and you may just have a towing company that tows 2 cars. If you have 3 towing companies that bid against each other and they know they're each involved and they know the lowest company, the lowest price, the highest number of towers is going to win, things competitively can change. In the same way, you can have governments compete. So multiple governments can compete for who will provide ambulance services, police services. You can have Chicago Police will offer its services or vice versa to another small suburban neighborhood, or training of police, or purchasing of trees by governments can be done as a collective group thing at a better price for trees from tree growers and so forth. So mayors around the world are doing these kinds of things. Following, to some degree, the Italians and Greeks who lived from tourism and amenities for centuries. The University of Milan offers degrees in business management and tourism and many related courses and programs. Can we catch up? How does Chicago eliminate these processes and provide lessons for organizations worldwide? We'll read sections of what we've done on this, and we've got. I'm bringing in a number of examples, but the date that I mentioned before was the increase from 1993 to 1994. Tourist rose in Chicago 1993 from 32 million to 43 million in 1997. For the average business convention traveler estimated to spend $242 a day. This implies that the Chicago economic zone took in $16 billion in 1997 and indirectly $29 billion. The most visited park in the United States is park. Which park in the US is the most visited? The Grand Canyon? The Chicago lakefront is above the Grand Canyon in the number of visitors. Navy Pier is part of that. Those concerts with people coming in for 4 months over the summer, I showed you Lollapalooza, more than the Grand Canyon. Okay. What's our time? Okay. Got more questions, discussion on anything? Yes.
So I'm curious, I think, obviously, like the knocking on that is like the hanging of the NPC culture in terms of like narrative. Do you see like that trend as these, I guess, using these false kind of more traditional left-right populism, especially, for example, I can always use my tweet, but in California, for example, Antonio Villaraigosa was really big on what I call investigating public transit. You had Gavin Newsom, who was really intent on expanding public health in San Francisco as mayor, and now and the mayor like cities, affordable housing. What do you argue the expansion of full government, expansion of like city spending, or changing in California section directly attacking the anti-government businesses? You of NPC culture shifting, do you see it fracturing as the 21st century goes on?
Yes. The quick answer, I completely agree with everything you said. These are excellent examples. I'm sort of giving you the history of how the NPC emerged. I didn't really talk about what you're adding, which is this was the revolution with Bill Clinton. It's the establishment when Trump comes along, or when Gavin Newsom comes along. In between were, say, Obama as president, where he was the revolution in bringing a black face, but he really did not bring a focus on black culture or a separate new political ideology. He moved closer to the traditional left. So we have Hillary Clinton in a debate, in the Democratic primary when Barack Obama ran against Hillary Clinton. In the Ohio debate between the two of them, one of the questions was, do you support NAFTA and exporting of our jobs from Cleveland and Ohio to Mexico? And Barack Obama said, absolutely not. I'm against NAFTA. We should abolish it. We want to keep these Ohio jobs for people in Ohio. What did Hillary Clinton say? She basically agreed with Obama and disagreed with her husband's policy. So she shifted, and that illustrates even within the same family, and I'll point out the same kind of thing within the Obama family. The husband and the wife had very different party programs that they differentially implemented as they grew more separate from their husband. So yes, is the quick answer. And so the Democratic Party, I mean, it's split right now in Washington. The so-called progressives. There are people more in the center, then there are people closer to the Republicans, and similarly. So that is, you have all of these, and you have many splits. But to simplify, this table just has 4 boxes. I meant that just to be a simplified introduction, but clearly when I went through the 7 dimensions, you can have more or a lot less of those. And I introduced Trump as an example with his tweets, even though I cited it as issue specificity, not trying to say Trump is an NPC, but say if we look at these different components, they can be differentially borrowed, adapted, and they are, and your examples are perfect. So yes, yes, yes. Excellent question. Anybody else?
And one more actually from Sarah. She asks if you would say that Obama was an invisible leader.
I wouldn't, well, in some issues, yes. I mean, in the example as I framed it here, or say in the case of the Ohio debate, I would say both Hillary Clinton and Obama were trying to be responsive to what they thought was the Ohio majority of voters and the unions and the political activists in Ohio. So in that sense, they were both acting invisibly. So yes, for sure there are some policies where Obama was not the leader, need not be invisible. So the answer depends on the policy. But in that example, yes, and it's good to think in those terms and to do so. Are we near the end on time?
Yes, it's 5:50 now.
Okay. We will, we'll have, for our main office hours are Monday, but if there's something you want to talk about briefly on Wednesday, stay on, and or you can call in and we can do some things online either right now or afterward. Okay.
Far